I'm Danielle Smith from the Alberta Enterprise Group, collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton to interview candidates for the upcoming municipal election for Edmonton City Council. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 3, Iannie Gerona. Iannie, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I know that we're in transition and your ward name is going to change. So what is the name of the ward you're running for?
I'm running for the ward Tastawiyiniwak, and so if you want to say it in more broad terms, it's technically like north central Edmonton. So.
All right. What does Tastawiyiniwak mean?
So actually, Tastawiyiniwak refers. It's a Cree term, and it refers to the in-between people, and so it's a nod to kind of the LGBTQ plus community. So especially like the Two-Spirit folks, and so the names have changed as a result of consultations with Indigenous an Indigenous naming ward or committee, and so it's really great because it brings us back to kind of that reconciliation aspect of and consultation, right? And so I think that's really important in municipal politics is you have those meaningful consultations, especially with folks that were part of the original treaty conversations.
All right. Well, thanks for giving us that background. Now let's get into some of your personal background. Tell us a little bit about what you currently do and why you think that would make you a good city council member.
Yeah, so I'm actually in my last year of university. I'm a political science student with a minor in earth and atmospheric sciences. And over the last few years, I've been involved in a few different councils and committees. One at MacEwan University, Sustainability Leadership Council. And so with that, I was a project lead. And so I would advocate for like waste mitigation, sustainable practices. We would push for initiatives. And it's incredible what we've been able to do at MacEwan, especially considering it used to be a community college and it has grown over the years. But with the Sustainability Leadership Council, I've been able to host like waste audits, sorts. We have the beehives located on top of the campus. And so we kind of talk about like that circular economy where we have kind of the kitchen even at the university, where you go for lunch and all that, like they bring that part back to the community. And so with sustainability, it's been really great because it falls under numerous umbrellas, right? Or it's a large umbrella. And so you can talk like social sustainability, you can talk environmental sustainability. Really, it's something I never really expected myself to go into. It was more just like an outlet to kind of find more of my community at the university.
So tell me how you'd use some of what you learned to apply to some of the areas of jurisdiction for city government. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of waste, I had organized some visits to the Waste Management Center in Edmonton. And so seeing kind of where the center used to be, where it used to be known as, a state of the art facility and where it is now. And I see kind of those challenges where like we've been lagging behind. I mean, even right now we have a new waste cart program and people are finding difficulties navigating through that as well. And so it's been helpful that I did my work with the Sustainability Leadership Council, because in a sense I've been almost kind of doing like a sample study where it's with the students and it's with like the faculty and the staff there, and even just having those conversations with those folks has been really helpful. And then I just wanted to add as well that it's also tied in with my work through the City of Edmonton Youth Council. And so I was a youth at large for 2 terms there, and so as a youth at large, you can take the lead on some projects. And so I was part of the social equity subcommittee. And through that, I was able to organize some events where we showcase, youth multiculturalism and youth talent and heritage. And also we've been able to kind of discuss the city plan as youth. And so the City of Edmonton Youth Council acts as like an advisory board to, the Edmonton City Council. And so it's been nice because it's been a way for me to engage in municipal politics at least learn about it. And eventually, I guess with all that, it led to me deciding, hey, these are like processes I've already done, processes I've already dealt with, and I've presented to council a few times, and I've had those discussions with city councilors, and so kind of learning about how the I guess that system works and participating in it is kind of what drew me towards it, right? So,
Well, now that you're finished your university education, why make the choice to go for elected office rather than pursue the career that you were trained for?
well, for me, political science, I actually went into it more so looking at policy. So I wanted to do more behind
Hmm.
the scenes work. And what I found, especially over the last couple of years, is that through my participation with Youth Council and sustainability, there were some issues that really mattered to me and my community that I felt weren't being prioritized. And especially because of the fact that I'm a person of color, a woman, I'm young. I think it's important to have that representation
Hmm.
sitting there at the table. And so that's kind of why I decided, hey, if my counselor isn't prioritizing this, if these conversations aren't being had, especially considering, the like I came here as an immigrant and as a person of color, you don't think about municipal politics all the time. You're worried about getting on the bus and making it to work on time. And so when things like, transit, like the transit network, it changes, you don't realize until you're waiting at the bus stop and you see a different number on the bus that, oh shoot, like something's going on. And so for me, it's more so kind of getting more of those folks involved and getting them like to understand how these processes work, especially you know I know language has always been a barrier.
Hmm.
And if I could share a story of like the really like the turning factor for me
Sure.
for running for office, what had happened was, I believe this was 2 years back, we had gone through like a polar vortex and it was -40 outside. And so I had actually gone downtown to drop off my brother. He was going to go watch a movie and it was quite cold out. And I live north side, as I said. And so going back and forth is like, it takes a while. And so during my commute, my drive, I had seen quite a few homeless folks
Hmm.
on the streets. And we did have, like, the city did have an emergency weather protocol where they had an emergency shelter and they had the buses running for free for these folks. So if they needed to get to a safe place, they could. But the biggest challenge that I found was actually I was driving through Chinatown and
Hmm.
I had encountered a homeless man. I mean, I'm not even sure if he was really homeless. I just know he was outside. It was -40. He was kicking around a box, and I saw
Hmm.
him kind of. I was just concerned for his well-being, and so later on, after I had picked up my brother and gone back, I had gone to drop off some food, and it was funny actually because I told my brother, I was like, hey, bro, like, can you give the guy some food? Like, can you go out of the car? And my brother was like, no, like I'm scared,
Hmm.
I don't want to go up to the guy. And I said, it's okay, fine, I'll just do it. And so when I had met this individual, immediately I was like concerned because first of all, they were outside, but they were facing, I don't know if you know the iconic brick building in Chinatown, but
Mhm.
it's there on 101 and 107th. But he was facing towards the window, and he turned when I came out, and he was obviously a little bit like, like frightened. He didn't really know what I wanted, but I was there to kind of give him food and like a scarf. And when he turned, he had actually like a flame in his hand, and I wasn't sure what it was, like, and so I was concerned, like, oh, like, what's he doing? Like, I know most people will see that and they'll say, oh, this person is doing drugs. But what I came to find out was that he was actually trying to keep warm and he had lit a Tim Hortons cup on fire.
Hmm.
And then when I spoke with him, I was like, oh, excuse me, sir. No, I'm just trying to help. Like, do you need a ride to a facility or something? And the moment he spoke, he didn't speak English.
Hmm.
And that was when I realized, wow, there's people out here who are, who don't know what's going on, who are immigrating here, who come with their families. Like, these are people's parents, these are people's grandparents that are out on the street. These are people's family members, and they don't know that, they don't have to be outside. There's, Commonwealth Stadium had an emergency shelter with so many beds, and, you know,
So let me ask you then, because there's been a strategy to end homelessness for a long time. What do you think's going wrong then?
I think what's going wrong is that folks just keep getting displaced. And so, even right now with the pandemic, I'm like visually seeing more homeless folks on the north side. Before, like, you wouldn't see anyone at the intersections panhandling the drivers for
Mhm.
money. And now you see that, whether that's, in a high traffic area or not, there's more folks kind of, they don't feel safe in the core. Even it has come to that point where they don't feel safe at the core, and
Right.
they're being displaced to kind of like the outskirts.
So what would you do differently then? Because I mean, I think you've identified the problem, but what do you think the solution is?
I think the solution is having programs and having shelters in place. I understand that there's, more people downtown, but now that people are kind of coming to the like suburbs, I think it's important that we have shelters there as well to
Hmm.
show that we have places for people who need that help, who need that support. And I think the problem too is that there's no like transitionary programs. And so if someone goes into a shelter, how long are they like staying there before they realize, oh, I don't want to stay here, I want to just camp outside? How do we make these folks, or how do we give these folks the opportunity to like prove themselves that, hey, you know, even though I'm homeless, like I can work. And I know at times, sometimes with employment, with even staying at a shelter, if you don't have that card, that like information that, oh, I have an address where you can like, send me stuff or anything. That's the challenge there with people getting jobs, is that, they can't because they don't have the information to provide.
So here's, I guess, the challenge too, and part of it is so much of these issues are provincial issues, and the province is the one that has the funding. So let me see if I can if I can ask you how you balance that, because I hear where you're passionate, but tell me where you think the core business of civic government is. Do you think this is the core business, is solving that problem, or do you think that there are other areas that need a priority as well?
Well, I think, of course, we want to help our vulnerable population and make sure that, um, we get as many people off the streets. But then, like I said, those transitionary pieces where, okay, now they have housing. How do we ensure that these people can kind of keep affording that? How do we ensure that the infrastructure is in place? How do we ensure that people can get from point A to point B? And so, ensuring, I think, in terms of infrastructure, like for sure, buses, ensuring that that information is accessible to all people, whether they are, disabled, whether English is a second language, but also that those folks, or those, I'm losing a little bit of my where I was going, but you know,
Well, let me get into this a little bit, because I want to broaden it out, because there's a lot of issues that are connected to this. So let's get into a couple more of the infrastructure issues that you were raising. For instance, with the Valley Line Southeast as an example, really high ticket item. There's a number of other LRT projects that are being proposed: the Valley Line West, Metro Line Northwest, Capital Line South. Is this the kind of expansion that you think is needed, is focusing on LRT, or do you think there's a better way to build out that public transportation piece?
I think at the moment, I mean, if I talk about North Edmonton, around like 80% of folks drive. And the problem is that, they don't see that public transit as the like a beneficial thing, because there's no investment in it. And like I have friends who have, since kindergarten have lived on the north side, and they've told me, hey, they used to say, like when I was a kid, that they're going to build this LRT on the north side. And it's like, I'm not a kid anymore. Are my kids even going to be able to experience that? And so unless those links are there in place, then I don't think that people will take anything else under consideration, right? It's like whatever's
Mhm.
accessible. And if transit isn't accessible, if only the roads are accessible, if the bike trails aren't accessible, what's that good? How are people going to even get anywhere? And
Right.
so, and let alone like, if you move to a new place, if you're in like a older neighborhood and they're rezoning, redeveloping certain areas, how is that going to affect, kind of like your core utilities. Like, how is that going to affect sewage? How is that going to affect traffic coming into your neighborhood? And so I think the important part there is just having those conversations with the community, participating with them, and ensuring that those people's needs are met. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to just get by. And so if those aren't there, if transit isn't well built, how is someone supposed to get out? Like, how is someone supposed to, sell their car and then just take the bus instead,
Right.
And I think that's, like, in a way, like, there's other cities where we've seen that very successful. I mean, you can even see in Calgary, I mean, they have the major highways connecting the different, because it's so spread out, but at the same time, the transit is there to connect the neighborhoods. You go to Montreal, you go to Toronto, it's so incorporated where, in Toronto, like, I have family kind of more so like in the greater area, like in Vaughan and Woodbridge. And the fact that you can take transit from there to the core, and it's, you feel safe, it's reliable. I want that for here. Like, we can easily look at so many major cities that are doing this and succeeding at this. And
Right.
of course, there's still challenges there.
Well, let me talk to you more about the things that might be missing in some of your communities, because there's a notion under the city plan about 15-minute communities. So clearly, transit is one area that you think that the amenities are lacking. What other areas do you think would need to be focused on to make sure those 15-minute communities exist?
I think it comes down to even like local business support. And so a lot of local businesses, we see them close time and time again downtown, kind of. There's always like empty office spaces and all that. And so, property taxes and stuff are quite expensive depending where you live, and let alone leasing, property to start a business. And so we need to have those supports available for those small businesses and for those, like, nonprofit organizations in the community, so that they can function, they can provide the resources that they're, that they can do what they can for the community. And so
Can I talk to you about a couple of those things? Because
absolutely, yeah.
what sort of policies would you support for trying to attract business? Because you can do tax breaks, you can do tax holidays, you can do regulatory red tape removal, you can do direct business subsidies. What kind of things would you propose?
I would lean more towards like renewable energy, like sort of subsidies to kind of like upgrade businesses and homes. So ensuring that, if we're transitioning to renewable energy, ensuring that houses and buildings are retrofitted with, the technology. And so in a way, like, for like, I know the province has done this where they've provided subsidies where you change your light bulbs and, get like power saving like cords and stuff like that. And so I think, although this is something the provincial government does, I think as a city, they should also offer some similar incentives, where, you have folks kind of growing along with technology. And so at the end of the day, you don't want communities left behind. And I think communities are finding, I mean, I'm hearing from some residents where they're saying, oh, they're talking about infill, like rezoning for infill. Like, how is that going to change, how our neighborhood communities function? Like, is there someone that's going to be looking down into my yard or something like that? And just having those, these are genuine concerns that people have, because they move into a place and they expect to live here maybe their whole lives, like, 40 years or something. They expect to retire in that neighborhood, but then if things change and we aren't consulting the residents, or we are, but we're not having meaningful consultation, that's where the issue is. And
so let me ask you about that, because that's kind of the tension that you have when you're developing a community is, do you densify and build up so that you can use existing infrastructure, or do you build greenfield and new suburbs? Because that addresses a different aspect of affordability for first-time home buyers. How do you see that balance?
Yeah, so I think, we're so privileged that we have such, we have like a lot to expand out to. I know the city likes to and urban planning studies say, we don't want urban sprawl. We don't want it to kind of like expand out further. But then what happens if we don't have that urban sprawl is that we keep building up, and then where do we keep building up? Is it going to be at the core? Is it going to be like, around like the suburbs? Like I've seen it in Mill Woods. I mean, I grew up in Mill Woods, and now there's a huge tower right beside Mill Woods Park. And I never expected I would see that. But, Southside has had their investment and their opportunities to grow, and Southside is continuing to grow quite a bit. And I can see that development happen on the north side too. It's just about, ensuring that folks understand and are part of those conversations and know that, hey, we're going to expand this neighborhood out this way. How do you feel about that?
Right. Let me ask you about the another area of development, because the city's decided to be its own developer in the Latchford lands. That was the site of the former city center airport. Do you think the way they're approaching it is a good idea, or do you think there's a better way of doing it?
Blatchford is challenging because I've heard a lot about it. Like, I've attended this conference, Place 18, and they like to promote, Blatchford and like, these garden suites and all these other opportunities to kind of expand. And my greatest concern there is more so like, I mean, this is what every taxpayer always asks is, how will it affect my property tax? And so even though like this is like old airport land, I mean, I don't know too much about that specific area.
Okay.
But I've seen, I have friends who live in the Prince Rupert neighborhood. I've gone in and out of the area from time to time. I think that the idea of, having a neighborhood there would be nice, but at the same time, it's like almost like you're in a box, because that used to be the airport, right? And so it's almost like it's this land, but it's surrounded by everything. And so unless you kind of develop a neighborhood where you still, like, I know they said, I believe it was like carbon zero. They wanted to build a carbon zero neighborhood. I think that's amazing. And at the same time, just ensuring that those spaces have the green space and like room for communities and neighbors to use, because with the older neighborhoods, right, there's just like small plots of land that they're trying to fill out. But with this, you have the opportunity to kind of build something incredible.
Okay.
And so I do think that it's good, but at the same time, I don't represent that ward, and I don't know too much about the residents' concerns. And so from the bigger picture, like just from looking at it from afar, it seems like a good idea, but I'm sure there's many challenges that the city will have to face.
All right, let me ask you a couple more economy questions, because I think that and we'll get into the spending and taxes issues in just a minute, but I think a lot gets resolved if you have a growing city with new residents and new businesses. Give me your sense of how you think the Edmonton economy is going to do in the next few years. Do you see any signs that make you optimistic?
Absolutely. I mean, ever since they released the city plan, it's been very, as someone who has grown up here and as someone who plans to be here for a long time, I mean, whether, I leave briefly for maybe a year to study or something like that and eventually come back, I mean, that's probably down the road. But, there's so much opportunity here. And that's what's so incredible. As someone who immigrated here at a very young age, I've always felt welcomed, even though, there's some people who don't. I feel like I've had the privilege of kind of experiencing all the great things of what the city has to offer. And I would love to extend that out and ensure other people have those experiences that I have, because, I took transit at a young age. I used to walk to school. When I was a kid, we used to walk to the convenience store, and those little things, like just going to buy a slushie or, picking up a snack, like those things are what matters, especially to young people. Like, having that space and those like you said earlier, the 15-minute, it's like 15 minutes, but it's like 15 minutes for who? Is it for the working class? Is it for the young people? Is it for people who drive? Like, we need to make sure that those 15-minute communities are really for everyone.
You're taking me back in time. I'm thinking about going to the Sev after a baseball game. So I think you're right. We all have those. Let me ask you about the oil and gas sector, which has been a big driver in the Edmonton economy. I mean, Leduc with the original Leduc discovery is just a few minutes away. Do you still think that there is a good opportunity for oil and gas jobs?
I think at the end of the day, oil and gas, we still need to warm up our homes. We still need to use some of those resources, but we're coming to a point in our society where we're finding those alternatives. And so I know, EPCOR is a lot of these energy companies. Like EPCOR is investing in solar farms, and I think those it's important to kind of have those foundational stuff that like supports those further projects. But then it comes to a point where you say, okay, when do we stop and or when do we kind of slow down with our oil and gas investment? When do we stop building pipelines? When do we start kind of transitioning into that new renewable energy that there's that has so much opportunity? And so I think we still have, as Alberta is oil country, and so we still stand by that. But at the same time, it's like we want to be able to do more, and if we want Alberta to grow and really do more, and if we want Edmonton to grow, we need to support those opportunities to branch out.
All right. You mentioned the solar project, and it wasn't without controversy. In fact, it only passed 7-6 because it's, of course, being built in the Edmonton River Valley. If you'd been on council, how would you have voted on that?
Well, to be honest, I would have voted against it because even though there's other projects like the gondola project that's being proposed. It's been approved for design, I believe. And so the thing with solar farms is, I think it's a good idea. I don't think it's the right place for it. The River Valley is, it's the largest urban park in all of North America. I mean, it's been said to be even larger than Central Park. And that just shows how much opportunity is there. And if we don't preserve that, if we don't protect the wildlife, the environment, how are we supposed to kind of, I guess enjoy it or appreciate it? If it's no longer there, what are we going to do? And
right.
That's one thing that, all over the world, we talk about climate change and all that. And so unless we really preserve those environments, how are we supposed to kind of keep enjoying it and keep building community there? And so I love the River Valley. I think that's the most incredible part of the city. I don't even live by the River Valley. I live in North Central, but I will always bike down there. I will always find a way to kind of do something there. And so I think that in the sense with the solar farm, I think it could be good, but if we're building a solar farm in the River Valley, why the Edmonton Convention Center has solar panels there. Why aren't we putting it on our buildings then? Why aren't we directly linking it? You have the solar panel there, so why aren't we putting it on the buildings, retrofitting the buildings and ensuring that it's the direct connection? Why does it need to be? And I get it because the water and all that, as a earth and atmospheric science minor, I get it because those things are what draws the light towards, trees are going to absorb the light, the water is going to reflect the light. And so if we want to preserve those things, we need to put them in places where they aren't going to damage the environment. And
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's we've talked about taxes on the business side, but tell me if you're hearing any constituents raising concerns with you about residential taxes. Do you think taxes are too high, too low, or are about right?
I am not a homeowner. I just rent, and I lived with my parents prior to that. I know there's been some talks by other candidates running against me about a mansion tax. So anyone with a house, I guess over, I think it was 600,000 or something like that, would be taxed for it. And so I think the challenge is taxes, I mean, as long as the city grows, as long as we want to maintain the city, taxes will always kind of be there and increase because we need to keep up with it. But we don't want to overwhelm residents by suddenly, like, increasing property taxes by so much. Like if we're going to rezone an area, if we're going to develop an area, we want to make sure that those people, it's like a gradual process and that people aren't overwhelmed. I mean, we're trying to recover from a pandemic right now. And if property taxes, like, suddenly jump up, how are we, like, people will sell their homes because they can't afford their mortgages, and people will, leave communities. I mean, we see this with the younger generation. There's that brain drain and people will move to BC. You have no idea how many times I've heard from friends, oh, I'm going to move to Victoria, I'm move to Vancouver. And it's like, why? And then you guys are going to want to come back here because of how great it is.
You'll have the last laugh when they finally change their mind. Let's talk a bit about spending, because I see that you're quite concerned about taxes being too high. But what about the spending side? Is the level of spending too high, too low, or about right?
I think it's not so much the spending, it's where the money is being spent. So in terms of like consultations, if we're consulting and we're spending millions on consultations, who are we consulting? Are we consulting the right folks? Are we investing in those community engagement events where folks can come out and, have their say? Or are we only investing in kind of the big businesses that want to be consulted? Like if I go into the case with the gondola projects, even though, that would increase tourism with spending, and the city doesn't really have to spend much. It's like, what is being spent though? I get it, money is being spent, and it's the city doesn't have to pay for this gondola project, but guess what? The environment has to pay for it. If we have to cut down trees, the wildlife can't pass through there. What happens is wildlife, again, will also be displaced. And that's when we start seeing coyotes in our communities and more, animals kind of coming out. I mean, I've heard the other day that people are starting to see raccoons, and I never thought that would be a thing here, right? Like, I mean, we have the strictest like rat program. I mean, I think that's one thing that always stood out to me too, is like, the way Alberta has been able to kind of stop rats from kind of going all and doing their business. But you can see in places like obviously New York, when you develop and it's urbanized, rats will still do their thing. These creatures will learn to adapt as well. And so like, do we want to invest in like biology and like biologists and people who can help like guide wildlife, and do we want to invest in people who know how to preserve the river valley, people who those indigenous communities, and I think of course if you have folks like the chiefs of certain like Cree nations and stuff supporting it, it's like, yes, these people support it, but think of it like counselors. These people are representing those folks, but you still need to hear from the rest of the community.
Right.
So I think that's really important.
So let's then talk about one of the big ticket items for operating spending, which is wages. So let's begin first with council wages. Do you think that the amount that is paid to a council member is appropriate, or do you think it's too high or too low?
I mean, I think it's too high, honestly. I mean, I didn't even look, to be honest, when I decided I wanted to run for office, I didn't even look at the wage. A lot of, people can do a lot of things with not a lot of money. I mean, people can make ends meet. And so, I mean, I believe city councilors in Edmonton get paid $100,000, something like that. And it's
I don't know the exact amount, but yes.
Something around
six figure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'd be happy getting paid $50,000 if that meant, ensuring that money was going back to the community and folks and investing in the wards,
So then how do you feel about the wages for frontline workers? Because oftentimes union contracts get negotiated several years in advance. And so you end up with year-over-year pay increases that might not reflect what's happening in the economy, or moving up the pay scale, even though we're seeing some hardship in the private sector. Do you think there needs to be a different approach on frontline collective bargaining?
Yeah, it's tricky because with frontline workers, you get the public sector workers and you get the private sector workers. And so if I want to talk about, like grocery store workers, I used to work at I still technically work at a grocery store. I work in a plant shop above a grocery store, but the people that can get those like benefits from the government, there's so many different qualifications you need to meet. And so if you're making this amount, if you're making that amount, you don't qualify. Like both of my parents are healthcare workers. My mom is a unit clerk and my dad does housekeeping. And because my mom gets paid more than $20 an hour, she doesn't get a tax, or it's not a tax break, but she doesn't get a benefit, right? And even though it's basically the same, right? It's like, this is the same amount of money she was making prior to the pandemic. This is the same amount of money she's making after. And if anything, like those folks are the ones working twice as hard. They're the ones ensuring that, for her, she works at a senior home. And so they're there ensuring that our senior community is, getting taken care of. And we have a family friend who passed away from COVID. And this was actually in Calgary because they worked at a long-term care facility there. But is that like these people truly put their lives on the line? And I think more needs to go towards them and supporting them because they're really putting themselves at risk, whether it's a grocery store worker, whether it's a healthcare worker, anyone who works in like that, where there's that high traffic, like lots of folks coming in and out. Yeah. And even like the vulnerable folks, like I said, like the seniors, people with autoimmune disorders. We need to make sure that those people are safe.
Yeah.
But the people working frontline are safe because they're the ones engaging with everyone.
All right. Let me ask you then about the layer up managers, because the city auditor found that the number of managers middle management has increased 22%, and the number of supervisors has increased 19% since 2017. Do you think it's a problem?
I think it can be challenging because, like, as someone who is an employee, it's like, who do I listen to? And so I think if you are going to have positions like a supervisor position, what I really like about my workplace is my boss is, she owns the plant shop, she owns her business. And so what has happened is that, even though it's not like we're all supervisors, we still have some of those tasks. And then with that being said, we're paid a little more because we're doing social media, we're doing receiving, you're doing things that someone who would be a supervisor would do. But at the same time, it's like now you have all these people with training to do this stuff. And so down the road, you don't need to worry about your business as much because you've trained folks to do this. And you don't need to necessarily have someone that's just one person that's a manager because, they're not the only person running the business. Like there's lots of people involved. And so ensuring that, if you want quality, I think it's important to ensure that those folks that aren't in those like manager and supervisor positions have these skills and all that, because down the road, maybe someone has the capacity to do something like that. And so that opens the doors for your business, for other businesses, because now you have the talent there.
Okay.
And training those folks, I think, is the most important.
All right. So let me ask you some questions about issues that have come up in the last year and just get your take on them. First of all, there was a movement calling itself defund the police. What does that term mean to you? What was that movement about in your view?
Mm-hmm. So I know there's been talk even about like abolishing police and all that. And I think, we've had this policing structure and system in place for a long time. And I think defunding police, it's a very general statement. And so when we say defund police, to me, that means reallocating funding to the community, reallocating funding to social programs, reallocating funding to other things, as an Edmontonian, I've seen, I live North Central, which is right by Garrison. And so we'll see those big trucks come by, the military trucks or like the armored vehicles. And it's always like, why do we need this here? I mean, you can train for it and I understand that, but like, we're not in the middle, like we're not in a country or a city where you need an armored vehicle. Like who are we like fighting against? And so it's like we don't like I think that defunding police means reallocating that funding to initiatives that will do that are part of the groundwork. And so, you know, you can get an armored vehicle and get a nice police academy set up, but we need to make sure that the funding is directed to the funding that does exist is directed to ensuring that the folks that are going through the police academy are getting adequate training, are getting more than adequate training, you know? And yeah, so although like, you know, there have been a lot of challenges with police, you know, I think it comes down to even in like reinvesting that money into community. And so if you have those programs in place, if you have those community leagues, and if you have people participating in those community leagues, and if you have those gardens, if you have those green shack programs, and we invest the money in there, then you don't need to worry too much about, you know, calling the police every time you see someone outside your door. You could just go to your neighbor and say, hey, do you know whose car that is? And if you guys don't, then that's when you kind of start that investigation. And I think it's important that the community feels connected to one another. And so if we can divest from police and invest more in the community, I think that will go a long way.
All right. Well, I guess this is one that could be community building, but it also requires more policing, which is the issue of reducing speed limits down to 40 kilometers per hour. And some councillors wanted it to go to 30 kilometers per hour. What's your take on that issue? Is that the right decision?
So I'll actually tell you up front right now, I actually presented at that council meeting. And I was for the reduction of speeds because at the end of the day, these are our communities. And so 40 in a residential zone, I don't think that's bad. Your kids are running down the street. Your kids are playing ball hockey. They're walking to the park. We want to make sure that these communities are safe for those people, and we don't have to wait till someone gets hit or some incident happens to deal with it. So I think reducing speed limits is I mean, it's not the only way to kind of prevent those incidents from happening, but I think that it's a step in the right direction because, you know, so many incidents have happened and people will always speed. People will speed no matter what. But if we can hold those people accountable and like, you know, the people that want to break the rules and speed, it's like, yes, we'll ticket you because you're bringing your like safety is what's at question here. Safety is the concern. And so if I'm crossing the street or if I'm walking down a sidewalk, what is going to prevent a car from suddenly hitting me? I mean, this is a really recent event, but someone I went to high school with, and I didn't know them that well, but they were walking down on the north side along a street and a drunk driver had hit them. And it's like, why? You know, like they were walking at 10 p.m. at night. And I get it, like the lighting there is not the best, but what barriers are in place to prevent someone or to protect pedestrians?
Right.
I think that's a challenge that the city has had to deal with a lot is, you know, even in the downtown, even like all over the city, when you have those streets, we can protect the cars. Like there's space for the cars to move around, but who's in the car? Who's the one walking out on the street? They're the pedestrians. And those are the people we want to protect because at the end of the day, those people are still, you know, they're our neighbors, they're our residents, they're our friends, they're our families. And we don't want to see them in any like situations where they're put at risk. And so if we can protect people, I mean, downtown, they do a great job because they have flower beds and those like, you know, blockades almost kind of protecting the pedestrians, but we need to see those in our communities too. And
okay.
Yeah.
Let me just get to a couple more questions before we finish up here. One is on the issue of the private sector and the role that they should play in providing city services. So the garbage collection's already half private. Discussion about having privatization of the operation of golf courses. Generally speaking, how do you feel about that approach?
I think, I think in some ways privatization is good because we need that investment. We can't afford to do everything ourselves. And so I know they've talked about rec centers getting privatized. The city has worked with the YMCA before and partnered with them. And so I think if we look at it more so as like partnerships, we can work together to provide better services for our residents, for our citizens. And so it just depends. It's a case by case, I think,
Okay.
question. So
Let me, I'm also looking at a picture of the think tank downtown library and just wondering, do you love it or do you hate it?
I haven't visited. I've seen from the outside, and I've seen even conceptual ideas prior to them building it. And my dad actually got his degree, his undergrad in architecture. So whenever we see a new building built, I'm always like, okay, like what's going on here? And I think it's not so much the outside that we should be concerned about, it's what's offered on the inside. And from what I've heard and what I've seen, it looks absolutely incredible. One thing, and I know I'm not supposed to be showing Calgary some love here, but as an Edmontonian, but I absolutely love that library downtown. I'm not joking. I'm dead serious.
You know what? You're the second candidate to say that, and I'll say the same thing I said to them, which is, are you do you want to reconsider that answer? It might end up getting you in trouble.
Well, okay, here's my answer. I love it, and so I want to replicate it. And so if we can replicate that in Edmonton, I still have to see how the think tank is, but look, judging from what it is and what I've seen and what I've heard, it looks like one of those places where we can it draws people in. For the longest time we had West Edmonton Mall. That's technically private investment, right? And so having those public services really there for the public, like I can't help it. I just love that stupid library in Calgary.
Right.
but like I've seen like the libraries in Toronto, I've seen the libraries in Asia even.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good things that can be produced. And this is just one library downtown in Edmonton, and it's amazing. Yeah. But imagine if we can make that part of every community, like have everyone have access to those kinds of facilities. And even prior to the renovation, they had almost like a creative hub where people were allowed to, like, they had 3D printers, they had digital, like, computers and cameras and stuff for people to rent out. And when you give people access to those things, they can create such amazing things.
Yeah.
And now that's why I'm drawn more to the Edmonton Public Libraries, because I've gone there since I was a kid. I used to go there and just hang out on the computers and play, like silly computer games. But at the same time, the little facilities there where you can build something, you can create something. Those, like, that's what I love about public services.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me give you the last question here, because it comes down to the issue of the role of the elected council member. There'll be some situations where the administration puts forward a proposal that they see is best for the city as a whole, but your constituents will want you to vote another way. What would you do in those cases?
As an elected official, my role is to represent the residents, to represent the constituents. And so when something is proposed by administration, for example, the districts, they've canceled a lot of neighborhood plans, a lot of area plans. this is something that the city administration has put forward to go alongside the city plan. And I think, it's important that those conversations are had with the community. And this was something I spoke on. This was something I was at a public hearing for. There's these neighborhood plans that they're removing, and they want to develop these district plans. But the challenge there is the district plans aren't instant. They aren't going to build these plans like overnight. And so we still need something there to take us along the way. And so I think, some of the neighborhood plans shouldn't have been repealed, because there's people were part of that building process, and all they can hope for now is that proper consultations with the public are done. Because one big neighborhood that I was hearing a lot from, it was not in my ward, but Parkdale was really concerned about the repeal of their neighborhood plan, because this was something that many residents who have lived there for years were part of. And if this plan is repealed, it was repealed, what now? We're just waiting for things to get done and then find out when a letter comes to our door. Like, I think the city needs to do a better job, especially when it comes to like a neighborhood plan, on consulting the whole community. Because if you're transitioning to a district plan, you need to make sure that the community is part of the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's honestly, I even talking to you, I never thought in a million years I'd be talking to Danielle Smith. I used to, me and my friends used to follow provincial politics in 2012 and all that. So.
Not my finest hour, but thank you so much for that, and good luck on the campaign trail. I appreciate your time today. That's Iannie Gerona. She is your candidate for Ward 3, Tastawiyiniwak.